Welcome to Wines and Wonders with Kirsten Fox. True stories with a side of wine. Looking for inspiration for your life and your wine glass? This is your podcast. Here's Kirsten.
Hello and welcome back to Wines and Wonders. We are so excited about talking about time for this season number 3, and I am so happy to have Danielle Bryan of the Shamanic Twist in the studio to talk about this with us from a completely different perspective than we normally consider time, which is our watches and being late to things. Well, that's my experience at least.
Or being really early.
Right? And getting to sit there and go, wow, I've got so much time. What am I going to do with it? And then you end up being late because you get into a book or something. But we've got Danielle here. She's at shamanictwist.com. And what we decided to talk about today, now, a lot of this stems from an experience that I went through. Now, we all have a relationship to time. This is nothing that we don't all consider on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. But at one point, and why my curiosity about time came into play was if you haven't listened to the first episode of the first season, I had an experience where I was in meditation and I was delivered this message saying there's still time. And so it's always, since then, there's been this curiosity about time for me. And so we're really digging in this season to talk about different aspects of time. And today we've decided to talk about how or if the past, your past, helps predict your future. What does that look like? Past as a prelude. It's neat. It's so full of certitude, right? If you've done this, then you're going to be doing that, right? It's all just predicted and all of that. Kind of like you open a fortune cookie and you just, now what the rest of your life's going to look like. And so here we are. We're talking about the past, possibly or not, predicting your future.
Right.
And I've got some scientific studies on this. And welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. Great
Happy
to
have
here.
you back.
Yes.
Woohoo. So do you want to start, do you want to start with a science or do you want to start with a concept for a shamanic concept first?
High level, I'm just going to say to our listeners that in this episode, as we talk about does our past set our future, what does that look like? I want to outline that what we're actually talking about, Kirsten, when we say that is linear time. We're talking about time that flies like an arrow. We're talking about a conceptual idea of time that we all have, frankly, that says the past is over here. And for most of us, we'll actually orient the past as behind us or off to the left or off to the right. That's just a personality thing, but it tends to be behind, right?
Okay.
And you just actually did that same thing.
You talked about it with your hands.
Yeah. And you pointed toward the behind of you, right? And when we talk about the future, we tend to point our arm either straight in front of us or just off to the left or off to the right. It's really interesting because if we really start to look at that, that's our orienting principle to how we relate to time.
And this is very common to do the behind and the forward.
Yes, this is our cultural norm.
Okay.
Is that we say the past is here and the future is here.
Okay. American culture.
Yeah.
Or
I don't know. I can't say that it's just American culture, but it's very humanistic.
Okay.
That will go past, future. So you guys can't see me, but I'm reaching my arm behind me and reaching in front of me, right? Behind, past, future, forward. And that is a linear sense of time. It's saying that the past is behind us and we can't affect change back there, but the future is ahead of us and we can affect change. And those things high level are true. And in my world, in the shamanic world, we actually recognize that we operate outside of linear time in what we call sacred time or circular time, meaning that we know how to traverse backwards in time and bring healing to an event that took place in the past that then ripples forward and creates a different outcome for us in the future. So high level, I just want to talk about and set the stage that as we talk about this concept, most of us automatically drop into a track that says, the past in the events that took place have determined who I am in this present moment right here today in my life, and will predict or create a probable outcome for what is possible for me in the future. And what we teach in the shamanic path and in the classes that I teach is that we actually can effectively bring healing to the past, which changes our possibility for the future. That we don't get stuck in probable outcome because of our past, but we can actually intentionally unhook from that linear timeline that flies like an arrow and step into sacred time where anything and everything is possible for us. So,
wow. Yeah. There's actually, okay, you're not going to believe this. There's actually a study I've got that talks about this kind of thing. There are actually many. It was very interesting to do this research, but what this particular study did was it was a sociologist at Princeton about 4 years ago named Matthew Segalnik. He decided, he was inspired by Netflix.
Nice.
So Netflix had gone out in 2006. Mm-hmm. Netflix had gone out to ask programmers around the world. They had a competition, and they said, hey guys, here is the data from Netflix. We want you to write a computer model that finds hidden patterns in Netflix watchers' behavior, right? So these guys, so this is great. This scientist was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this same type of a study. And it worked for Netflix. It really did. Mm-hmm. Like the data that these programmers found allowed Netflix to put more and more of what you might want up, that kind of thing.
Right.
So this guy thought, well, this is going to work, but it's going to work in a larger type of a thought in terms of sociology, basically to predict what sociologists really care about, which is like, what's the high school GPA going to be of this kid? Which child is going to persevere if there's adversity? Who's going to become homeless? Mm-hmm. Those kinds of predictions, right? And so I know.
I don't want that study.
No, yeah, right? Dangerous. So what he did is he asked people around, he wondered about this pattern finding ability of our computer system. And he got massive amounts of data on 5,000 kids who'd been followed from the day they were born. I do wonder where these kids came from, because no one asked me, can we follow your kids? So I don't know where they get this data. But then he took that information and gave it to data geeks and researchers all over the world. And so 400 teams participated in his 5,000 kid data analysis. And what he wanted is he wanted them to look at their birth to 9 years old. And then he said, I want you to predict their grades when they're 15. Okay? Mm-hmm. So these teams went out, and 400 teams did this. And this is what he said at the end of the study. And after he'd done all the compilation of the data, I would say this is not impressive. I think this is sad, disappointing. Basically, the predictions were a lot closer to 0% accurate. Mm-hmm. They were almost not predictive at all from what the past of these kids was supposed to predict about the 15-year-old grades.
Right.
And so so then we talk about how unpredictable our actual lives really are. And what you're saying is just because it happened in the past doesn't mean that you learn a new, it's like you would forever smoke the rest of your life.
Right.
No one would ever quit.
Right.
Right. If you had one car crash, you would have 15 because you didn't know how to, you didn't learn from that.
Right.
So can we talk about human learning from past behavior and apply it into, how does that change us as we go through? Or is that something that shamans really consider? Or do they just kind of look at what is? How does that go?
It's so interesting because there's the way in which we can study humans, if you will, in our behavior from a scientific standpoint and probability, right? There's also a study I was reading in the notes that you had shared with me about, criminal activity is one that's studied. That says if you, are found guilty of committing all of these criminal activities before a certain age, then probability says you'll continue to do so. Right?
I've got that there's a fact right here from that study, and it said only about 4 out of 10 of those individuals judged to be moderate to high risk of future violence, 4 out of 10 went on to re-offend in their lives.
Okay.
So 6 out of 10 didn't.
Right.
So that's not predictive.
Right.
Okay.
So, you're asking me how, through a shamanic lens, how do we talk about this? So I'm going to give you the shamanic lens answer.
Perfect.
Because
I'd love to hear it.
Science will read different data. And, there sometimes are predictabilities in the psychology of the data that is collected. But what's interesting, the wild card, is that outside of linear time, and we operate in sacred time from a shamanic perspective, meaning that we recognize anything and everything can change. But that doesn't mean anything and everything will change. But it can. And based on personality, circumstances, your desire and willingness to have a different quality of experience, your ability to have learned from the past, let's say, and apply it to the future of like, wow, that didn't work so well. Got it. Don't necessarily need to do this again. Some of us operate that way. Some of us, it takes 5, 6, or 7 times before we go, oh, right, got it. Yes.
I think one of my kids is that way.
Yeah, right. And
you're
so,
like, what are you, how many times?
Yeah, how many times? And so, there's a little bit of a personality thing that goes along in there. And just what is it? Now, from my perspective, in what I do when I work with clients or I work with students, I'm looking at, interesting, fascinating. What's the motivating driver for how you actually step into your life and begin to orchestrate your life in the choices that you make?
Does this have anything to do with, like me? I'm a person that likes to plan.
Right.
And because if I plan, then it's more likely that I'm going to get somewhere towards where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact is, I'm just trying to control the future by planning and getting into it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Which sometimes, COVID-19, anyone, doesn't work for you.
Right.
So does that have something to do with this?
It does have something to do with it. We look at breaking down limitations and rigidity. So we look at saying, there's a probability of what outcome can be here, but there's also the ability to step out of that probable track and step into what is possible. By the time we're having this conversation, we have jumped from hardcore stats and psychological scientific data research, and we've jumped into this quantum realm of anything is possible. Because there's validity to statistics.
Right.
There is.
There's
as a shaman, I'm not sitting here and saying, oh, poo-poo on that.
Right. I mean, that guy that was so sad that his results, but it showed the randomness of humans.
The randomness.
Well, and what you're talking about is that humans and their behaviors and what they learn and all those different variables came in and they changed the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't predict the grades of those kids.
Right.
That's maybe my question right now is if there are things in your past that you really aren't proud of, you don't necessarily feel like they're helping you in your current situation. Is there a way that we can do something about? You said there's a way we can do something.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't have to become a shaman to do an action on ourselves.
No.
Okay. Well, she's looking up to the ceiling.
You don't have to become a shaman, but you may want to go visit one.
Okay. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there is something to be said. Okay, so for you listeners who have not heard Kirsten and I in the past, and I've been on her show a few times, what do I do? So as a master practitioner of shamanic energy healing, I work with people one-on-one to bring shifts to old patterns, wounding, stories, and traumas that are held in our body. So we're working the energetic level. We have a 4-body system. Physical body, we all get that. Mental, emotional aspect of ourselves, we get that. We have a spirit, soul aspect of ourselves. I think we even get that right now, mainstream. We can talk about the soul of things, right? We understand that. And we have our vast energetic matrix. Now, and so what I do is, my ability is that I can see what field, an issue, a pattern, a wound, an affinity. An affinity means that we have an attraction for something, where that's held in the multidimensional body, and then how to bring effective shift, change, transformation, healing to that said thing, which actually changes your vibrational frequency. And when we change our vibrational frequency, we begin to attract different scenarios or people or situations into our life. So that's a quick high-level explanation of what I do, which I need to explain as I'm about to answer this question.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, this is great.
And we work outside of time, meaning that we unhook from linear time. We recognize that anything and everything can be healed, resolved, and our future can open up to infinite possibilities. Now, when I say anything can be resolved and healed, that doesn't mean that we can change the event that took place, because the event that happened is the event that happened. Okay? If we're talking about a traumatic separation or a traumatic death of somebody or a traumatic car accident, let's say, and I know these are not fun examples, but they drive
it helps.
The point
yes,
home, right?
It does help.
That we can't change that any one of those things actually happened, but we can change how we relate to the event. We can actually heal the trauma that happened in that event. And when we do that in a session, and I'm working with a client, and we're healing the trauma that came from that car accident, essentially in the quantum realm, Kirsten, what we're doing is we are healing the impact that that event had on that person's energy body. We're shifting the impact that that event has on a person's energy body, where it's held. It's probably held in the mental, emotional, and soul level of that person, and which means that it trickles into all 4 layers. But anyway, the bulk of that density of that trauma is most likely held in that field. And we can effectively heal that trauma, which changes the way they engage the past. Remember at the beginning of the show, we talked about, like, most of us will reach behind us, maybe not directly behind us, but behind us to the left, behind us to the right, in terms of orienting ourselves to the past.
Yes.
So we are actually changing the way that that event is held. And what happens when we shift that is the ripple effect, just like when you drop a pebble in a still pond of water, those ripples go out, right? So when we effectively bring healing to something that's happened, the ripple goes forward in time and actually sends out a different pulse, if you will, a different vibration into the future. When we shift the vibrational pulse that goes out, what happens is we allow for ourselves to attract something different into our future because we have healed or shifted the way in which we engage our history, look at our history, hold our history.
Can I interrupt you for a sec? Okay. So, is there a way, without being guided by a professional shaman, is there a way for, like, a way to kind of get yourself back into, many of us have a pretty good idea of some of our big wounds from childhood, which we maybe we don't think they affect us anymore, but we surely, if we're looking at those things affecting us going forward, we could go back and say, what are some of the things that really hurt me? A teacher I had who was very belittling, parents who told me not to dream, or get your head out of the clouds, whatever it was, money doesn't grow on trees, all those things. Is there a way for us to just kind of take, it might not be as thorough as a shaman, it won't be as thorough as a shaman would do, but can you get us back just to have our own little?
So a lot of what we work with in the full medicine wheel program is the concept and the idea of being able to look at anything and everything that has happened and stop and objectively ask ourselves, what was the deeper learning? What's the gift in this situation? And sometimes that is a hard bridge to travel. That is not always easy, especially when we're looking at really big events, right? To turn around and say, what's the gift in that?
Can you give me an example?
Yeah.
Just it doesn't have to be a real life example, but just.
So I'll give you a real life example. 2 years ago, I went on vacation. I brought my son. We went up to British Columbia. We were vacationing with my sister and her family and my mom at this really beautiful campground on an island right by the ocean, and it was stunning. And my sister has been vacationing there for 16 years and has asked me to come for years and years, and it just hadn't lined up until it did 2 years ago. And my son had been prior, and it's a really magical, stunning, beautiful place. So I finally am like, yes, this is the year I'm going. It's been over a decade of invitations. I'm going. Day one that I get there, I sprained my ankle really, really bad. First day of a 2-week vacation that has taken me 10 plus years to get to, right? Yeah. Now, most people could look at it like that, like exactly what your reaction is right now. Now, I could have fallen into, I can't believe this is happening. It's ruined my whole vacation. And I could have become the victim to the sprained ankle in this scenario. Rather, what I did real quickly, and note this, I'm trained to do this. Like it took me
we can
a
work
few
towards
seconds.
it. We can work towards this.
The outcome is, can we stop and objectively look at what's going on? So I realized quickly that the gift in the situation, the blessing, and what could have been looked at as like a horrible thing to have happened, was it forced me to do nothing.
Boy, these days, although coronavirus,
there we go.
We've all been in that, haven't we?
There we go. So we could look at coronavirus, right, as another example. And what I was able to do was look at it. And what happened for me, Kirsten, because otherwise I would have been busy on my vacation. It still would have been vacation, but I would have been hiking and running and off doing this and off doing that. And instead, I couldn't do anything. So I did a whole lot of meditation. I napped, which I'm not generally a napper. I read a lot, which I do, but not like for hours in the middle of the day, typically. Right. And I did as much stretching and yoga as I could with a severely sprained ankle. And I had the most rejuvenating vacation I have ever had in my life. Hands down, that was the most rejuvenating vacation I had ever had in my life. And I watched how it took me 5 days to detox and unwind out of my go mentality. Mm-hmm. I had no cell service, so that was another blessing.
Oh, wow. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that took care of that. And I had profound time to sit and be in meditation and have really big ahas for myself. And I came out of that experience rejuvenated, reinvigorated, and nourished from my time off. That was the gift in that situation.
So that was I will say, if I'm analyzing this from the outside then, that was a near recent experience, right?
Yeah.
So you could, it wasn't 40 years of build, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is if we, and you didn't specifically say this, but I'm extrapolating this, that if we to start to try to do this with ourselves, to look at COVID, say, because it's a near recent experience, and say, and let me tell you, for 6 weeks, man, I was sobbing every day. I was a mess. And, but then after I could stop and look at it as what is the gift of this instead of what is it taking away from me,
right.
I was able to view it in a completely different way. And it's certainly a lot easier for someone like me who's not trained to look at my near recent experiences to say what could be the gift out of being at dinner with that completely obnoxious person, 2 weeks ago. What I hated every minute of it. What can I learn from that? And then maybe is it possible then to learn, as we learn about that, to take ourselves further back?
Yeah, you can take yourselves further back. Yeah.
So that seems reasonable.
And ask the question, what was my greater learning? For those of you who are inclined to understand the soul engagement, you can ask the questions. This is what I do with students and the clients is I say, what is it that your soul learned through that experience? So really that's the level of engagement that we're operating at.
Okay.
Because the soul level of engagement is different than the mental emotional level of engagement. Because at the mental emotional level, let's just strip that down and look at it for what it is. It's mental, mind. It's a emotional, direct feeling kind of level of engagement. And at that level of engagement, most of us want it to be analytical, linear, and logical.
Oh, we want God, I wanted that right? so badly.
We want it to make sense.
Want that.
Give me the answer that's going to make me go, oh, I get it. Even if we don't like it.
No, really, seriously.
Okay, I get it.
And then you can predict it.
Yeah.
You can, from the past, predict the future, right? Because then you're not dealing in just a world of complete unknown.
Right. But at the, in my world, and through the shamanic lens, we also look at, okay, but then there's this soul level of engagement, which says everything is divinely orchestrated, and it does not make linear sense. It does not make, most of the time, a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of logical sense. So we have to start looking at it more abstract. Another way to exemplify what I'm talking about is that we talk about the language of the 4 body systems. So the language of the literal physical level is looking at our cells and our molecules and what our physical body is doing. Okay, we all understand
inflammation, blah, blah, blah.
Correct. Okay. The language of the mental emotional level of engagement is words.
Okay.
Right? We
So I
get
love
that.
words. I love words.
Yeah.
And numbers probably
Right,
too in
right.
there. Ooh.
The language of the soul level or the mythic level is imagery. It's art. It's poetry. It's dance. It's an orchestral piece.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Yes. It strikes us at a different level. When you're in a museum, so some years ago I was in Germany, and it was fascinating because I went into this museum where they had rooms by the artist. So there was the Monet room, there was the Van Gogh room, there was the, whomever room, right? And so you walk into the Monet room, and it's Monet, right? You're looking at all this most beautiful artwork of light and flowers and gardens, and it exuded a peaceful, serene feeling, right? So that's the language of the soul. You're looking at that. It's striking you at a different way.
Yes.
It's a feeling. It produces a feeling. Now, we could begin to use words to try to describe what we're feeling or seeing. But a lot of times when we're using words to describe what's happening at a soul level, our language sounds like this. We'll say, I'm not really sure. It kind of was like this. It felt warm, and it had like a fuzzy kind of feeling to it, and it was like slipping into a bath, right? So it's very metaphorical, right?
Right.
Because it's not just like, then I went to the grocery store and I walked down the produce aisle and I shopped for my salad fixings, right? So we describe the soul level in a different way.
That's so interesting, because that is what often there's a problem with describing wine.
Yeah.
Because it is, first thing, extremely subjective. So just like an art, just like it, and it goes into the ambiance of where you are. It goes into what you're pairing the food with, who's the company.
Right.
I mean, all these different variables, which are unnameable in terms of creating the energy associated with having that sip of wine in that location and what it was to you. And I have people in class sometimes say, okay, there was this wine. I was drinking it on a beach in Italy. I was about to propose to my wife, my wife now, and I was just wondering, like, does Utah carry that kind of wine? I'm like, no, that kind of wine is only available once in your entire lifetime. You will never get another bottle of wine like that.
Right.
And so it's okay, just appreciate it. But that's exactly, for me, describing that inability to put into words the experience of what you're.
And that's the level of soul's engagement. That's the soul level. Okay, so we're giving these really wonderful, fluffy examples of
soul level engagement. Okay,
so looking at your past, what that whole like, what's the gift from this? And I said, another way you can ask yourself, if you were going to ask yourself this question through a shamanic lens or a healing lens, what has my soul learned from this event? It actually will pop you into a different region of your brain to come up with the answer.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Your brain has different regions involved in this kind of a question, just a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what part of the brain? What's that?
So at the soul level, if you will, if you're operating in that level, it is the neocortex of the brain. Okay. So the neocortex,
which is the whole outside of the brain? What's the neocortex?
The neocortex is kind of more of the front
side. Okay.
Front part of the brain. Yeah. Whereas the mental emotional level of engagement, we're in the limbic brain or the mammalian brain. Okay. Which our amygdala happens to be in, which our fight or flight happens to be in, which produces this like stress response.
Yes, right? That's in our mental emotional level.
That's the region of the brain we tend to be in.
Okay. Yes.
So if we're operating at more of a soul level, if you will, we're in the neocortex, which is the higher reasoning part of the brain. Okay. The higher reasoning part of the brain that begins to assess situations and look at things from a different perspective and see things and really start to, this is also sometimes the part of our brain that we wonder when our kids will ever develop it. Because there's a higher level of thinking.
Oh, I know there are many, many studies on all of that.
Yes.
I don't have those prepared. But yes, you are correct. That's
right.
what we wonder as parents.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're in a different region of our brain. So when you can ask yourself the question of, what is it that my soul learned from this event? And you really take the time. Like if you're asking me, Kirsten, what can I at home do by myself, not go see some trained professional, not go take this class or that class or what have you.
For the time being,
For the
yes.
time
That's
being.
what I just want to be able to do.
Then I would say, can you look at something that feels like a sticking point for you, whatever that means, and ask yourself the question, what is the gift from this? What has my soul learned from this? And if you can take 5-10 minutes to be quiet and to really let the answer come. The trick is, don't think the answer.
Just let it come.
Let it come.
Wow.
That's the key piece.
Because then you're using your mental capacity
Correct.
to reason your way as to what your gift should be.
Yes, and that is the limbic mammalian brain, where you have the past and the fight or flight and the trauma laid down in your field. What happens with trauma is that it actually lays down in our field. In my field, we call it the affinity. It lays down in the field like a scratch in a CD. Remember those? Remember
I thought you were going to say record.
Right,
so,
okay.
I'm that far.
So we all remember that once upon a time when we listened to CDs, if there was a scratch, the whole CD is fine except that one part of that one song.
Right.
And it skips. Chick, 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 chick.
Yes.
Now, an affinity is like that scratch in the CD. Now, it can lie dormant, just like on your CD. You can listen to 10 other songs.
Yes.
CD plays just fine, right? Till you get to that one part of that one song. An affinity lays in our field, and it can lie dormant until something triggers it. And then it's like hitting that one part in that one song. So that affinity is laid down in our energetic field, but it actually is stored in that region of the brain that will take us into fight or flight. Now, what does this have to do with time and linear time and sacred time and outside of linear time? It says that if we're caught in that affinity, or if we're caught in that pattern, we will actually have the tendency to repeat that pattern, okay? Or I call it the anywhere but there. We have the tendency to make every single decision in our life based on what we never want to happen again.
Well, that makes sense.
Which actually limits what is possible for us. It keeps us caught in that linear timeline.
This just happened to me. Now that you're describing this, I did have another professional helping me, a coach, and I kept saying how much I was about connecting people, and that was one of my, gifts, and blah blah blah. And I said, and I love human connection, and I said I even go so far as to get upset when my children are fighting, and these are older children now. This isn't like in the house. These are adult children. I get upset when they're fighting because I don't want them to fight. I want them to get along and love each other. And so I will intercede. I will start defending either one to the other one, trying to let them see the point, blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, "You're trying to control the situation is what you're doing." I'm like, no. I'm just trying to point out the strengths of either of their arguments to each other. And he's like, "No, you're trying to..." And I was like, "Okay, well, if you're telling me I'm trying to control the situation, all right, I believe it." He goes, "Why are you doing that?" And I'm like, "I don't even have any idea." But we looked back as I sat there quietly. It was my job to look back into my childhood. And I realized in my family, I had been the one, my parents, I was the oldest, 2 sisters below me. And my parents put me, seriously, literally, I was the one that was in the middle of the back seat on the hump in the old station wagon, that hump seat.
Yes.
And because my sisters fought all of their lives until just recently. And they fought to the point where they would hurt each other. So I was put in the middle. So the reflection back was, Kirsten, you were made to pay for other people's conflicts. So I take that with me into my businesses, into my life right now. When friends are fighting, it I almost have to leave the friendship because it makes me so upset. And so what he had me do then in that moment, as we were talking about this, is go back and talk to my little 9-year-old self who was put in charge of babysitting these wacko sisters. And I have a note back from my parents. Well, I was writing it to my parents because I didn't want to get in trouble because they'd come home and there would be bruising. And I mean, this note says, Sarah bad, Allison bad, screaming, yelling, kicking, hitting, bleeding. I mean, this is a horrible note, but I was I'm documenting this, man, and my little 8-year-old self so that I don't get in trouble when they come home and my sisters are scarred because you couldn't keep them from hurting each other. So, but that has now, by dealing with that and talking to my little 9-year-old self and saying, it's okay. You were put in a no-win situation, girl. Love ya. Well done, as best you could do. And it kind of has freed me from allowing that feeling of angst if anybody is fighting around me.
Right.
I don't have to solve it anymore.
So you know what you did?
What?
You went backwards in time, essentially. You brought healing and resolution to a way an event or a situation or a condition, really, was held in your past, air quotes for those who are all listening. And you shifted that. And then remember I said what happens when we do that is we come into a different vibration. It's the ripples that move forward. Ripples. It's dropping the pebble in the lake, right? And those ripples, that new vibration ripples forward. And you just described it. You gave the lived example of what I was talking about, Kirsten, which is I freed myself from taking this into my future friendships and relationships. This is exactly what we're talking about. Does your past predict your future? Yes, to some degree it does, because you just gave us the example of this happened when I was 8, 9, young. This was literally my job. And so I took it forward into all of these things. And then I had the question put to me, why? And you were able to identify where it was seeded, if you will, like the seed being planted, and bring a shift to it. And let the ripple move forward, which then takes you out of that particular linear timeline, Kirsten. What it did is it allowed you to hop off of that track, if you will, into a different pool of possibility. So
beautiful.
Yes.
So then what would you say my gift was out of that? When you're saying, I'm asking, if I do this myself, I had a gentleman helping me, my coach, helping me a little bit, but if there's something, what question, if I go back, if I take myself back into childhood, why, what's that? So I would have said to myself, what is the gift, little Kirsten? I would have walked into the room, imaginary room, there's little Kirsten sitting there, and I say, tell me the gift that you're getting out of this. What are the things, the skills, the people skills that you've gained, all these things? Okay.
Yep, that's what you would do. And then you wait for the answer to show up. Remember, don't think the answer.
Don't think it. That's the hardest part right there. Man.
Yeah, don't think it.
All right. Well, we've got a quick wine I'm going to pair with this after this segment break. And so stay tuned. Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah.
Stay tuned to hear what type of wine Kirsten will pair with this story right after this.
Today's podcast is brought to you by my company, Uplift Gift, when words aren't enough. When I had cancer, friends sent me the most amazing, wonderful gifts and cards, and they were from their hearts, and they made me feel so comforted and loved. And at the time, I was writing a column for the Huffington Post on wine pairings called Wines to Pair with Life. And so I wrote a series of articles about wines to pair with breast cancer. So in my public in the public, purview, people started contacting me saying, what should I send my friends? what were the best gifts when someone gets bad news? And finally, I just heard, this message that said, this is what you need to do, Kirsten. This is your gift out of your cancer that you can give the rest of the world. So the company, again, is Uplift Gift. And we help you support your friends and loved ones who may be far away from you, who just are getting a divorce or are dealing with a parent dying or are struggling with a new diagnosis. I realized people need help talking to others who've been given bad news. Since I've been through that experience quite a few times in my life, I feel like the Uplift Gift series of gift boxes are a perfect fit to help you support your friends. Uplift Gift, when words aren't enough.
Next up, Kirsten's choice for a wine to open after the show.
Well, I can't believe I didn't tease this before the show or at the beginning of the show, because usually I try to say, and I'm going to be pairing this with but anyway, I didn't. So, surprise! This is the wine I'm pairing it with. I'm going to pair it with an Austrian Grüner Veltliner by Ugl, Hugl. And Grüner Veltliner, I was corrected on my pronunciation because we would see it pronounced Veltliner, usually Veltliner, but it's Veltliner, really. And it is a wine out of Austria. And Austria, so we're going to talk about the past and what happened in the past to Austrians and the Austrian wine industry that literally completely eviscerated their wine industry for almost 15, 20 years because it was a horrible scandal. And then they were able to rebuild with new policies and procedures and rules and testing. But the world, it took a long time for the world to forget. So Austria, if you know your geography, it's a pretty chilly place, right? It's up high in the latitude area. So it's very hard for them to get grapes to ripeness. So they will always choose grapes that can get to ripeness if possible. Most of those are white grapes, but some are red, but they need as much sun as they can to get these grapes ripe. Well, if the grapes don't get ripe enough, just pretend like you're picking a strawberry that's green. It has no sugar in it, right? And so then the problem is if there's no sugar in it, there's nothing for the yeast to eat. And the yeast eating the sugar creates the alcohol and it creates carbon dioxide, which is usually blown off. But that's the process of creating wine. So if the grape isn't ripe enough, the juice isn't going to be ripe enough. And they were outlawed back then. They were not allowed, and they still aren't allowed to add sugar into the juice, which then would allow enough sugar there. The yeast could eat it. There would be enough alcohol to call it wine, but they weren't allowed to do this. Now, there is some of that allowed in some areas in those northern latitude regions and it's called chapterization, okay? So you're allowed to add sugar in some cases, but they couldn't. So instead of sugar, there was a great idea, somehow bantered around, to add diethylene glycol. So you're like, wow, diethylene glycol sounds so friendly. And no, actually not friendly.
That wouldn't have been the word.
Yeah, okay, yes. Anyway, okay.
I get it.
Diethylene glycol is a primary ingredient in some antifreezes. Yes.
Yeah, tasty.
Actually, incredibly poisonous.
Yep.
But what diethylene glycol has is not only, sadly, a sweet taste. It also has viscosity, thickness to it.
Yeah. Which is why cats will lick antifreeze that leaks in the driveway because it's sweet. Diethylene glycol right there. So the problem is we don't want that in our wine, right? Yeah, bad for cats.
Bad for cats, bad for humans. So 1985, The Austrian industry is shipping sweet wines out to Germany.
1985.
1985.
Okay.
What did I say?
Sure. No, you did say that.
Yeah,
Just
1985.
sure
I mean, it's not that long ago,
no.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe before you were born, not before I was born.
No.
Oh, okay. And so they were shipping this wine, this semi-sweet wine, out to Germany. Thank God. This was West Germany at the time. West Germany, a few of these horrible bottles got out and really hurt people. But there was a testing facility, and somehow a couple of these bottles got into the testing facility. And then the backtracking happened, and the trying to figure out where this had come from in Austria. And basically, the entire Austrian wine industry collapsed completely because there was no known as to where this was coming from and everything. It literally took 20 years to even get back on the radar, even the red wines. And so that would have been 80s. So that would have been, early 2000s. And that is when you started to see a wine like a Grüner Veltliner come into the United States. Now, it's taken a long time for that to be consumed. We're at 2020 right now, and Grüner Veltliner is kind of on the cutting edge. People look at it and go, "Oh, I've heard of it." A lot of the hipsters call it groovy because Grüner and groovy, but it is a really cool white wine that is has got interesting flavors of almost bell peppers and fresh herbs and things. And then you add this really great acidity, so a nice citrus, but you also overlay some white pepper in there. It's got this spicy pepper kind of experience in your mouth. And it's not super expensive. So when you're looking at like the Ugl, Hugl, Grüner Veltliner out of Austria, a liter bottle. Now, it is 25% bigger than a 750. Those are our normal bottle sizes, 750. This is 1,000 milliliters, right? $13. So you talk about a great like barbecue wine when you're throwing things on the grill. You have the pepper and you've got maybe onions and green peppers and mushrooms and all that alongside it on out of your skewer, It is such a great wine to pair. And Ugl is distributed nationally and an easy wine to find. Should be $13, $14. And thank goodness we do not have diethylene glycol in our Austrian wine anymore. And so there is a story of a wine that was trying to forget their past, and they decided to learn from it, stop adding that to the wine, and bring more modern winemaking techniques rather than just poisoning people. So anyway, that is the pairing today for our podcast on how does the past predict the future. Do you have any questions about the wine at all or anything going on?
Why does it come in a bigger bottle?
God bless those Austrians. I think
More
they
is
just
better?
did. Yes.
Okay.
That's all. I have no idea why they put it in liter. There are some that are in 750s, but the Ugl particularly is in a liter bottle, and many of the other ones are in liter bottles. So
what is a liter bottle? Is that what we call a magnum?
No. A magnum is 1,500 milliliters.
Okay.
So it's almost like you wouldn't perceive it as bigger, except when you hold it, it's like, God, this is a really heavy bottle of wine.
Right.
Because 250 milliliters is not that big a space. It's just kind of a little bit bigger.
Right. Okay.
So anyway, just look for that, especially in the Austrian section. They do a lot of it. Well, let's wrap this up. And
it's a wrap.
So happy to have you here again today.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're going to continue our discussion on time next podcast episode. So stay tuned.
We look forward to sharing a new story and wine with you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Wines and Wonders.